Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Institute of Peace shows that a large majority of Canadians are concerned about the increase in interest rates and inflation. They are living from paycheck to paycheck, and they need to spend their entire paycheck, or even more than that, which is very bad. This government is insensitive. It is refusing to present a concrete plan to help these people. Will this government finally commit to not further hiking taxes? Mr. Speaker, Canada has a AAA rating and the lowest deficit in the G7. That's fiscal responsibility. And you know what else we need, Mr. Speaker? Compassion. That is why we are going to double the GST tax credit. We are also creating a $500 housing benefit. We are also going to bring in dental care for children under 12. Canadians can afford to be compassionate, and we will be. The honourable member. Well, the reality, Mr. Speaker, is that inflation is discouraging Canadians. We're seeing the highest increase that we have in 40 years. Parents are struggling to feed their kids. They have to make heart-rending choices. You know that, Mr. Speaker. But this government wants to raise taxes on taxpayers who are already barely keeping their head above water. Will this government promise not to further hike taxes? I'm asking for a simple answer, yes or no. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives really wanted to help Canadians, they would be supporting our plan. A 4-person family earning $35,000, a family like that, don't you think that they could do with $500 to help them with their groceries? Don't the Conservatives agree that a low-income essential worker who's struggling to pay rent, don't they think that such a worker could do with $500? We think that if the Conservatives really want to help Canadians, they should support our plan.
Lack hope.
Every day I hear heartbreaking stories from my constituents struggling to put food on their table and keep a roof over their heads. People are at their breaking point. They have nothing left to give. But this government wants to take more. They're set to raise taxes on paychecks, home heating, groceries, and gas. Why won't the government stop making things worse and cancel their punishing tax hikes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is, if the Conservatives really cared about hard-working Canadians who are struggling to make ends meet, they would support our plan. Do they really think a family of 4 earning just $35,000 a year couldn't use around $500 this fall to help buy groceries? Do they really think a 6-year-old shouldn't go to the dentist because her parents can't afford it? Do they think a low-income essential worker struggling to pay her rent couldn't use an extra $500? I think Canadians deserve the support. I wish Conservatives would agree.
The Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we certainly do not support their plan to raise taxes on the paychecks of Canadians, raise taxes on their gas, raise taxes on their groceries, and raise taxes on their home heating. We will never support that plan. Grocery prices are up 10%. Gas now costs over $2 a litre in the lower mainland of BC, and housing now eats up 50% of Canadians' paychecks. Why won't they stop making things worse and cancel their punishing tax hikes on Canadians?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives used to be a party that had a few core economic principles. They used to believe in saving for your retirement. They used to believe in fiscal responsibility and in a well-funded EI system. In fact, when the current Conservative leader was the minister responsible for EI, he actually presided over an EI premium 25 cents higher than the one that will go into effect next year. So the Conservatives need to pick a lane. What do they really stand for these days?
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, this government's tax increases are causing a national unity crisis, and those tax hikes will target those who can least afford to pay. Now, the Prime Minister knows that more carbon tax increases will divide our country further and make life even less affordable. But this Prime Minister has taken the same approach all along, to raise taxes on working people, put basic necessities like transportation and food out of reach, and then try to politically exploit the division that results. So will this government change course and cancel their planned tax increases on Canadians' paychecks?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I spent some time in Alberta this summer, and I have some very clear views on who is trying to divide Canadians. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the members opposite when it comes to the price on pollution, because the reality is we are putting money back into the pockets of Canadians. So will they ask Ontario families to pay back $745 this year? Do they want Alberta families to pay back $1,079 this year? Saskatchewan families $1,100.
Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, is this real life? Because that answer was pure fantasy. We have inflation, landslides, and no escape from poverty. When will the Prime Minister open up his eyes and see he's not a poor boy, but he should have some sympathy? For too many Canadians, opportunity had just begun, and now this government is going to throw it all away. Money is not easy come, easy go in this economy. So when will the government cancel their planned tax increases on gas, home heating, and groceries, and spare us from this inflation monstrosity?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Shocking to me that an MP from Alberta would be wanting to spare Alberta families a check for $1,079, which is what they are getting because of our carbon pricing scheme. And I also want to remind the member opposite that it was an Albertan.
I'm just going to interrupt for a moment. I'm having a hard time hearing, and I'm sure many other members in the chamber are having a hard time hearing as well. And I know everyone's excited to be back, but this is the second day back, so I'm sure everybody will learn to calm down and think that. We don't want to repeat the question, but I'll ask for a repeat of the answer. Thank you. From the top, the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay. So, Mr. Speaker, what I would like to ask you, and through you all Canadians, is whether the member opposite, who is an Alberta MP, is really suggesting that our government stop paying $1,079 to every family in Alberta this year. I think the people in that member's riding could really use that support, and I think they appreciate it. And I think they remember that it was Preston Manning who advocated strongly for a price on pollution.
Mr. Speaker, the price of food, gas, and housing continue to go up. And yet, this government wants to brag about a one-time $500 rent check that will almost certainly be vaporized by inflation. And we now know on January 1st next year, the Liberals will increase paycheck taxes on anyone making $60,000 by over $1,000. Will this government cancel their planned paycheck tax increases?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the Canadians who are watching and listening to us today want one thing above all from us all, and that is compassion. They want us to understand that things are tough. They want to know that we have a plan to get through it, and they want to know that we're going to support them. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I just don't understand why the Conservatives will not support us in giving about $500 to families struggling to buy groceries. $500 to Canadians struggling to pay their rent.
The honourable member for Edmonton Riverbend.
Mr. Speaker, what they want is more money in their pockets. Canadians are actually choosing between housing and affording food. It's people like Michelle and Stephen in my riding who are struggling to put food on the table for their 3 kids. They don't want more government handouts. They simply want to be able to afford to pay their bills and buy their groceries. In fact, 1 in 5 Canadians have taken on more debt and more loans just to afford the basics. When will this government cancel their planned paycheck tax increases?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, the Conservatives are wrong. There are no tax increases. We're talking about EI and CPP. And Mr. Speaker, we are helping families. In fact, families in Alberta in that member's riding are already receiving a 50% reduction in childcare fees. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, economist Ricardo Trefon said today that is helping families pay for the high cost of living. It's helping them pay for groceries. It's making sure that they have the things that their children need. Mr. Speaker, we're delivering for Canadian families every single day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
With basic essentials getting more and more expensive, Canadians continue to feel the crunch of sky-high inflation. Families are barely getting by, or worse, just hanging on. And this government is going to punish them further by raising their paycheck taxes on January 1st. Canadians simply can't afford this Liberal government anymore. So will the government cancel their planned tax increases on Canadians' paychecks?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you know what is one of the big differences between our government and the Conservative members opposite? We know that Canadians are smart. We know that Canadians understand the difference between taxes and paying their EI premiums and paying into the Canada Pension Plan. Canadians know that saving up for our retirement and creating a fund to be sure we get support if we lose our jobs is smart policy. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? We know Canadians need support. That's why we have a plan to give them that.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
The big difference is that we will leave money in Canadians' pockets. With rising inflation, Canadians can't afford any more taxes. Paycheck taxes are heading towards an all-time high for Canadians. As of this January 1st, the paycheck taxes of a Canadian making $60,000 a year will have increased by almost $1,000 since this Liberal government took office. So will the government listen to Canadians and cancel their planned tax increases on Canadians' paychecks?
Right here. Here, here. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the sad reality is that in pursuit of populist, partisan talking points, the Conservatives have become the party of fiscal irresponsibility. And the other real shame, Mr. Speaker, is that they are unwilling to set partisanship aside and join with the rest of the members of this House and help the Canadians who need it the most. With $500 to pay their rent, with a doubling of the GST tax credit, with help for kids who need to go see a dentist. Hard to understand, Mr. Speaker.
For Foothills.
Biggest threat to Canadian farmers is this Liberal government and their devastating policies. The minister is misleading Canadian farmers in this House, and she knows it. For example, they said the carbon tax would be revenue neutral. They know it's not for Canadian farmers. In fact, Ontario grain grower study showed they get less than 20% of their carbon tax back by the Liberal rebate. Even their finance department knows it, saying the average farmer gets $800 back through the carbon tax rebate. $800. They spend tens of thousands of dollars a year on inputs. That is one day in a combine. One day. With the food affordability crisis where it is, will the Liberal Ag Minister defend Canadian farmers and oppose any new taxes on...
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I'm here and we are here to support farmers days and night all year long. And we are investing in our farmers. We are investing in the ag sector. I'll just talk about the clean technology program for one example, because we know that farmers need equipment, need new technologies to be more energy efficient, to be able to do precision agriculture, to fight against climate change, because this is the real threat to food security. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Peterborough Kawartha.
45-year-old Jake makes $30 an hour and has put in over 200 hours of overtime this year, but is still struggling to make ends meet for his family. This Liberal government is planning to triple the carbon tax on gas, heat, and everything else. It is the most expensive government in history, and the more they spend, the more things cost, and the more Canadians like Jake continue to hang on by a thread. Will the Liberal government give Canadians like Jake a break and cancel their planned tax increases on Canadian paychecks?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we are totally focused on addressing the affordability challenge for Canadian families, and I know in my home province of Manitoba, Mr. Speaker, many families are struggling, and that's why I'm so heartened to hear about the measures that have been introduced by the Finance Minister, and that's why, Mr. Speaker, it's important the price on pollution and the climate action rebate will put more money in people's pockets. 8 out of 10 families will be better off, and good news, Mr. Speaker, these checks will arrive in the mail in October, quarterly, and that will help with cash flow and affordability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Peterborough Kawartha.
What an insulting answer to Canadian families everywhere. This affordability crisis is a mental health crisis. When you can't afford to put food on the table for your family, that is a mental health crisis. Anxiety, depression, suicide. That is compassion when you can pay to feed your family. This government, this Liberal government, has doubled our national debt, adding more debt than all previous governments combined. Yet they are planning to increase taxes on gas, heat, and groceries. So I ask again, will this government cancel their planned tax increases on Canadian paychecks?
The Honourable Minister.
Just because Conservatives repeat something does not make it true, Mr. Speaker. We are not raising taxes. In fact, this government has given more money back to families than any previous government. Let's talk about the Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker. That can return up to $7,000 for children under the age of 6 for low-income families. Mr. Speaker, that's different than the $100 of checks they sent every month to millionaires. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about childcare. 50% reduction in fees by the end of December. That's thousands of dollars for Canadian families. Mr. Speaker, that's real help that's going to help real Canadians. We understand things are difficult, and we're there.
The honourable member for the honourable member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the price of food continues to go up across the country, and instead of attacking inflation, this government wants to continue to handcuff Canadians with high food prices. The increase that's coming for the carbon tax is only going to make things more difficult for farmers. It's going to make it more difficult for them to put food on our tables. And it's also going to make it more costly to transport those products. Canadians are having a hard time making ends meet. They want to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Will the government cancel the increases on taxes for Canadian farmers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, listening to the Conservative leadership race after the last number of weeks, the party is still debating whether climate change is real. And Mr. Speaker, that's not surprising since the Harper Conservatives did absolutely nothing for 10 years on the climate file. Mr. Speaker, while Conservatives are stuck in the past, we're looking to the future. We're building the economy of tomorrow, the clean jobs of tomorrow, and we're working for affordability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, the proposed carbon tax will increase the cost of home heating fuel by 80%, as pointed out by Liberal Premier Furey. Seniors in my riding of Cumberland Colchester, such as Catherine and June and Carol, reach out to my office every day because they're in dire straits. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, Carol had to sell her wedding rings to pay for food. On their behalf, will this government cancel new taxes on gas, home heating, groceries, and their paychecks?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think all sides of this House are concerned about affordability and our citizens. And one party on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, is doing something about it. And that's why our climate plan is designed so that the majority of Canadians receive more in climate action incentive payments than they pay at the pump. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member will also know as the carbon price increases, so do the climate payments. And, Mr. Speaker, they will be now paid quarterly to help with both cash flow and affordability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland-Colchester.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think we know from the PBO that the carbon pricing plan is a failure. We also know that almost 40% of Atlantic Canadians currently experience energy poverty, by far the highest rate in the entire country, as vocalized by all of the Atlantic premiers. Clearly, Atlantic Canadians are being priced out of their own lives. They can't afford to house themselves, heat their homes, or feed their families. This government needs to commit today to cancelling tax increases. The question, Mr. Speaker, is simple. Will they do this, yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for the question. And we on this side of the House realize there are unique affordability challenges in Atlantic Canada, and that's why the Minister of Environment just last week, Mr. Speaker, announced $120 million from the Low Carbon Economy Fund to help Atlantic Canadians transition away from heating oil to cleaner energy. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan for the environment. We have a plan for affordability. Every time that plan comes to the floor, the Conservatives vote against it. They have no plan, Mr.
York Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, LaRousse Haulage in Keswick has served the community of York Simcoe for over 75 years. But the future is looking bleak for small businesses like theirs because of the carbon tax. LaRousse has paid more than $65,000 in carbon taxes since May. And that's with just 20 trucks on the road. They're holding on by their fingernails, but with the carbon tax tripling, local businesses like LaRousse could go under. This is happening right across the country. The carbon tax is crushing Canadian small business. Will the Liberals scrap this tax?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we put a price on pollution, indeed, but we've also introduced a number of measures that will build the future economy, as well as create jobs and make life more affordable for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the honourable member has heard of our emissions reduction plan, which is going to get us to our 2030 targets. It has broad support from environmental groups to industry to farmers. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, every single time this comes to the floor, the Conservatives vote against it. They have no plan for the environment. They have no plan for the economy.
The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
How's the tree planting going? Mr. Speaker, before the pandemic, half of Canadians were within $200 of not being able to pay their bills. And then during the pandemic, these Liberals increased taxes on home heating, gasoline, and workers' paychecks. Now, when Canadians are falling further and further behind, they want to triple the tax on home heating, gasoline, and take more money from workers' paychecks. Canadians cannot afford this. Will these Liberals finally listen to struggling Canadians and cancel these punishing taxes?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Carbon pricing is widely recognized by nearly everyone except Conservative politicians as the most economically efficient way to reduce emissions while also driving clean innovation. And, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if they could talk to one of their colleagues from New Brunswick Southwest who says his province should go back to using the federal carbon price because at least it comes with rebates. Mr. Speaker, we agree with that honourable member.
The honourable member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, inflation is giving Canadians headaches, and interest rates are striking a sour note for those who are renewing their mortgages. Gas, food, and consumer goods, all their prices are going up, and the government wants to continue to increase taxes on Canadians. Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister is playing concerts outside of the country, will the Liberals cancel all of the tax increases that are planned for workers and seniors, as we, the Conservatives, have demanded? The Honourable Vice Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives really want to help Canadians, I have an idea. They can vote in favor of our plan which will really help those who need